I want to read you one number, and I want you to really hear it. Seniors placed in institutional care settings show cognitive decline at rates 43% higher than seniors who remain in community or home-based environments. Not 5%, not 10%, nearly half. And the single most powerful protective factor researchers identified wasn't medication, it wasn't surgery. It wasn't even a specific diagnosis being managed correctly. It was something so basic, so fundamentally human, that most people never think of it as medicine at all. It was autonomy. The simple, profound experience of being in control of your own life. Of waking up in your own home, making your own coffee, sitting in your own chair. That feeling that you are still the author of your own days is, according to the National Institute on Aging, one of the most potent protective forces against both cognitive and physical deterioration in adults over the age of 70. My name is Dr. Pablo. I am a board-certified geriatrician with 18 years of clinical experience, specializing in cardiovascular and geriatric health in adults over 60. And today I'm going to walk you through 5 alternatives to nursing home placement that the research says are not just comparable to institutional care. In several measurable categories, they are superior to it. Some of these you may have heard of in passing. At least one of them. The one I am saving for the end of this video, I would estimate fewer than 1 in 20 families have ever seriously considered. And that one, according to a 6-year study out of the University of California, San Francisco, is associated with a 51% reduction in nursing home placement. I need you to stay with me until we get there, because that number could genuinely reshape what the next decade of your life looks like, or the life of someone you love. Before we begin the countdown, I want to tell you what we are actually talking about when we talk about nursing home placement, because the framing matters. We are not talking about a neutral medical decision the way we might talk about which blood pressure medication to prescribe. We are talking about an irreversible environmental shift that, for many seniors, carries consequences that extend far beyond logistics. There is a phenomenon in geriatric medicine called transfer trauma. When an older adult, particularly one over the age of 75, is moved from a familiar environment into an unfamiliar institutional one, the body responds with a measurable, documented stress cascade. Sleep architecture collapses within the first 2 weeks. Appetite suppresses. Immune function drops. And the brain, which in older adults relies heavily on environmental familiarity to compensate for early cognitive changes, becomes disoriented in ways that can accelerate decline that might otherwise have taken years. Research has shown that up to 30% of seniors demonstrate measurable cognitive deterioration within 60 days of institutional placement, even when the placement itself was medically indicated. That is not a reason to avoid necessary care. But it is a very powerful reason to exhaust every evidence-based alternative first. And most families never do, because most families don't know those alternatives exist. We are counting down from 5 to 1, from powerful to transformative. Let's begin. Coming in at number 5, and I want you to set aside whatever image this phrase conjures, because the reality has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. We are talking about adult day health programs, specifically those operating under what is called the PACE model, which stands for Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. When most people hear adult day program, they picture something institutional, a linoleum floor, a television on too loud, seniors sitting in rows with nothing to do. That image for the modern PACE-accredited program is simply inaccurate. What a properly run PACE program actually looks like is a medically sophisticated, socially dynamic environment where your loved one, or you, attends during daytime hours and returns home every single evening. You sleep in your own bed. You keep your routines, you keep your pet if you have one. But during the day, you receive nursing oversight, physical and occupational therapy, physician consultations, hot meals, cognitive engagement programming, and social connection, all coordinated under one roof by a single integrated team. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University tracked over 2,200 PACE participants across a 5-year period and found that enrollees were 74% less likely to require nursing home admission compared to seniors with similar health profiles who were not enrolled. 74%. And their emergency hospitalization rates dropped by nearly a third within the first 18 months. Why does this work so powerfully for the aging body? After the age of 65, there is a process that geriatricians refer to as the deconditioning spiral. Think of it this way. The human body, particularly after 65, operates on a use-it-or-lose-it principle that is far less forgiving than it was at 40. The moment physical movement decreases, muscle mass begins to atrophy at an accelerated rate. The moment social stimulation drops, the brain begins pruning neural connections it interprets as unnecessary. The cardiovascular system loses efficiency. Inflammatory markers rise. And each of these processes feeds the others, creating a spiral that, once established, is genuinely difficult to reverse. Adult day programs interrupt that spiral deliberately and consistently, 5 days a week. They are not a social luxury. They are a physiological intervention. There is something else worth naming here, and it is something families rarely talk about openly. Caregiver burnout is a medical crisis that we do not discuss nearly enough. Research has shown that full-time family caregivers carry a mortality risk approximately 63% higher than non-caregivers of the same age. The physical and psychological load of providing constant care for a parent or spouse without relief is not sustainable. And when it collapses, and it does collapse, the results are devastating for everyone. An adult day program gives the family caregiver genuine breathing room, not guilt, not compromise, actual medically justified respite. The senior receives professional, structured care. The caregiver recovers. And the relationship between them, which is itself a health resource, gets preserved. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Frances. Frances was 76 years old, a retired librarian from outside of Columbus, Ohio. A woman who had spent her entire career surrounded by people and ideas. Her husband had passed 2 years earlier, and her son David had taken on her care full-time, working remotely from her spare bedroom and slowly losing himself in the process. When Frances came to me, her blood pressure was running dangerously high despite 2 medications. She had fallen twice in 4 months, and she was showing early signs of what I suspected was vascular dementia. David looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in a year. Because he hadn't, we enrolled Frances in a local PACE program. Within 7 months, her blood pressure had stabilized on the same medications she'd been taking without effect before. The difference was daily monitoring and medication management by the nursing staff. She had not fallen once. And David called me one afternoon, not to report a crisis, but just to say that his mother had come home the previous Friday, singing a song she'd learned at a group music session. He said he hadn't heard her sing in 2 years. That is not a small thing. That is what this intervention actually looks like when it works. Moving to number 4, and this one has been transformed almost beyond recognition by technology developed in the last decade. We are talking about home healthcare integrated with remote patient monitoring, a combination that researchers are now describing with a phrase I find both accurate and genuinely remarkable. They are calling it the hospital without walls. Here is what this actually means in practice. A licensed nurse or certified home health aide visits your home on a schedule calibrated to your needs, daily, several times a week, or weekly. They manage medications, oversee wound care, conduct physical therapy exercises, perform health assessments, and assist with activities of daily living as needed. But between those visits, small wireless medical devices create a continuous clinical presence that simply did not exist 10 years ago. A blood pressure cuff that automatically transmits readings to a remote clinical team. A pulse oximeter that alerts that team if your oxygen saturation drops below a defined threshold. A fall detection sensor. A smart scale, particularly important for patients with congestive heart failure, that tracks subtle changes in fluid retention before they become a crisis. If your numbers shift in a direction that concerns the monitoring team, someone contacts you, or your family, before you are even aware there is a problem. Research published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that seniors receiving this combined model of home health care and remote monitoring showed a 38% reduction in emergency room visits and a 29% reduction in hospital readmissions compared to seniors receiving standard community-based care. Among patients with congestive heart failure specifically, analysis from the Cleveland Clinic found that remote monitoring reduced 30-day hospital readmissions by 52%. The reason staying home is so medically powerful circles back to transfer trauma, but it goes deeper than that. Your home is not just a location. For adults over 70, it is a cognitive prosthetic. The layout of your kitchen, the placement of your furniture, the particular quality of light through your bedroom window in the morning, these environmental cues are actively used by the aging brain to orient itself, to compensate for early memory changes, to maintain a sense of continuity and self. When you remove that environment, you remove the scaffolding. Remote monitoring means we no longer have to make that trade. The entry point here is a conversation with your physician. Medicare Part A covers home health services when a physician certifies medical necessity, and the qualifying criteria are broader than most patients realize. A recent hospitalization, a chronic condition requiring skilled nursing oversight, functional limitations affecting daily activities. Any of these may qualify you. The specific question to ask your doctor is this: am I eligible for home health services under Medicare? And would remote monitoring be appropriate for my conditions? Those two sentences can open a door that most seniors never think to knock on. I think of a man I'll call Raymond. Raymond was 79 years old, a retired postal worker from Memphis, Tennessee, with severe COPD and a heart that his cardiologist described as working harder than it should have to. His pulmonologist had begun raising the possibility of a long-term care facility. Raymond's wife, Evelyn, who was 74 and managing her own arthritis, was not equipped to provide the level of monitoring his condition required. Instead, Raymond was enrolled in a home health program with continuous oxygen saturation monitoring and daily nursing check-ins by video. His exacerbation rate, the frequency with which his COPD flared into a crisis, dropped by more than half within the first 5 months. He was sleeping better. His weight was stable. And he was watching his Memphis Grizzlies from the recliner he'd owned for 22 years. Raymond passed 19 months later, but he passed at home, in his own space, with Evelyn beside him. That is not a small outcome. That is everything.
Now we are at number 3, and this one tends to end differently depending on where you grew up and what your experience of community looks like, because what I am about to describe has been quietly producing some of the most remarkable health outcomes in senior care research for over 2 decades, not in the United States, but in Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and Japan, and it is only now beginning to gain the serious attention it deserves on this side of the Atlantic. I am talking about intentional senior co-housing communities, and I want you to understand precisely what that phrase means before you form an opinion about it, because it is almost certainly not what you are picturing. Co-housing is not assisted living. It is not a retirement community in the traditional sense. It is not a nursing facility with nicer furniture. Co-housing is a living model in which a small group of seniors, typically between 8 and 30 households, deliberately design and inhabit a shared environment where each person or couple maintains a fully private, fully independent residence, but those residences are organized around shared common spaces, a common house with a kitchen and gathering areas, gardens, workshops, and critically, a culture of mutual accountability that is chosen, not imposed. Neighbors share meals several times a week if they want to. They check on each other. They distribute skills. One person drives. One person is a retired pharmacist who helps neighbors make sense of their medication lists. One person managed finances for 40 years and helps others navigate Medicare paperwork. The support is real. It is daily. And it emerges organically from people who have made a deliberate choice to age together. A 15-year longitudinal study conducted by the Danish Institute for Local and Regional Government Research followed 1,400 seniors living in co-housing communities and found that compared to age-matched peers in conventional housing, these residents had a 35% lower rate of clinical depression, a 28% lower rate of hospitalizations, and lived an average of 2.4 years longer. 2.5 additional years of life, not from a medication, not from a procedure, from choosing your neighbors and building a structure of daily human connection around yourself. The mechanism here connects to something that I think deserves more clinical attention than it currently receives: what chronic social isolation does to the aging body at a biological level. Researchers at Brigham Young University conducted a meta-analysis of 148 studies involving more than 300,000 participants and concluded that social isolation elevates mortality risk by 29%. A figure they specifically compared to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. After the age of 70, when spouses die, when driving becomes difficult, when adult children are living in other cities and calling when they can, isolation becomes the statistical default for millions of American seniors. It does not feel like a medical problem. It feels like a personal circumstance, a phase, something to push through. But at the cellular level, chronic isolation is doing something very specific and very damaging. It is chronically elevating inflammatory markers: C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and those elevated inflammatory signals, sustained over months and years, accelerate cardiovascular disease progression, cognitive decline, and cancer development. Think of your immune system after 70 as an infrastructure that requires regular social maintenance to stay functional. Co-housing provides that maintenance every single day, not as a program or an intervention, but as the natural texture of daily life. In the United States, the Elder Co-housing Network and the Co-housing Association of America maintain active directories of both established communities and communities currently forming across the country. Some are organized around faith, some are specifically designed for LGBTQ seniors, some are built around shared interests: farming, music, lifelong learning. The financial structures vary considerably. Some are rental-based, some involve purchasing a unit, but virtually all of them carry a cost profile that is substantially below assisted living while delivering health outcomes that, in the published research, consistently exceed it. I want to tell you about a woman I will call Miriam. Miriam was 73 years old, a retired high school art teacher from outside of Portland, Oregon. She had been a widow for 4 years, and in those 4 years she had done what many strong, independent women do: she had managed. She had kept her house, maintained her garden, stayed in contact with her children. But managing is not the same as thriving, and when Miriam came in for her annual cardiovascular review, her numbers told a story her composure was working hard to conceal. Her cortisol was elevated, her sleep was fragmented, her blood pressure had crept up by 11 points over 18 months with no obvious medical explanation. She had lost 9 pounds without trying. When I asked her directly how often she had a real conversation with another person, not a text, not a phone call, but a face-to-face human exchange, she thought about it for a moment and said, maybe twice a week. Miriam moved into a senior co-housing community 14 months ago. At her last visit, her blood pressure was down. Her weight had stabilized, and she had started teaching a weekly watercolor class to her neighbors in the common house. She told me something that I have thought about many times since. She said, I didn't realize how small my world had gotten until I watched it get large again. That is what this intervention looks like when it works. Not a dramatic medical rescue. A quiet, steady return to life. At number 2, we have something that I recognize may bring complicated feelings for some of the families watching this, because it asks something real of everyone involved. I am talking about structured multi-generational living, intentional, thoughtfully designed arrangements where a senior lives with or in close physical proximity to family members across generations. And I want to address the hesitation directly before I address the research, because the hesitation is legitimate and deserves respect. Version of multi-generational living that creates problems: the cramped arrangement, the unclear expectations, the caregiver who has no relief and no space, the senior who feels like a burden. That version is real. It exists, and it produces exactly the stress and health consequences you would predict. But that version is the result of poor planning, not of the model itself. When multi-generational living is structured with intention, with clear physical modifications to the home, with professional support services integrated from the beginning, with caregiver respite built in as a non-negotiable rather than an afterthought, the health outcomes for seniors are among the strongest documented anywhere in gerontological research. A landmark study published in The Gerontologist followed 3,100 seniors in structured multi-generational living arrangements over 8 years. Compared to seniors living alone, they demonstrated a 41% reduction in depressive symptoms, a 33% reduction in falls requiring medical attention, and a 47% lower rate of eventual nursing home placement. That fall reduction number deserves a moment of your attention. Falls are the leading cause of injury death in adults over 65 in the United States, responsible for more than 36,000 deaths annually. They are also one of the primary triggers for nursing home placement, because a serious fall, a hip fracture, a traumatic brain injury can eliminate a senior's ability to live independently almost overnight. The single most effective fall prevention strategy we have identified in the research is not a medication or a balanced training program, though both have value. It is consistent human presence. Someone who notices that you seem unsteady today. Someone who sees that the bathroom rug has shifted and moves it before it becomes a fall. Someone who observes that you have not eaten since yesterday morning and asks why. Geriatricians call this passive monitoring, and it is one of the most powerful clinical tools available to aging adults, precisely because it requires no effort and no compliance. It simply requires proximity to people who care about you. After the age of 75, the window between something seems slightly off, and this is a medical emergency, can be extremely narrow. Passive monitoring closes that window in a way that no device and no scheduled visit can fully replicate. The practical architecture of successful multi-generational living involves three components that I want to name specifically. First, physical modification of the shared home: grab bars, walk-in shower access, main floor bedroom and bathroom availability, improved lighting throughout, ramp or lift installation where needed. The AARP, Home Fit Guide, and the National Aging in Place Council both provide resources for connecting with certified aging in place specialists who can evaluate your specific home and design modifications accordingly. Many states also offer grant programs and low-interest loans specifically for senior home modification, and your local area agency on aging, accessible at eldercare.acl.gov, can tell you exactly what is available where you live. Second, integrated professional support. The multi-generational arrangement should not attempt to replace professional care. It should surround professional care, home health services, adult day programming, telehealth access. These should be layered into the arrangement from the beginning so that no single family member is ever carrying the full clinical load. Third, and this one is non-negotiable, caregiver respite. Respite care, short-term professional care that gives family caregivers genuine time away, is covered under many Medicare Advantage plans and most state Medicaid waiver programs. It is not an indulgence. It is a clinical necessity. The caregiver's health is part of the equation. Before I get to number one, and I want you to stay with me for this, because number one is genuinely unlike anything most families have encountered, I want to ask you something directly. Write your age and where in the world you are watching from in the comments below. I read every comment on this channel, every single one, and I want to know who is in this conversation with me, whether you are 64 and planning ahead, or 78 and navigating this right now, or an adult child watching this at midnight trying to figure out what comes next for a parent you love. I want to hear from you. Your experience shapes what I create for you. I want to tell you about a man I will call Walter. Walter was 75 years old, a retired structural engineer from Tucson, Arizona, with early-stage Parkinson's disease. His tremors were manageable, but his balance was deteriorating, and he was living alone in a two-story house that had become, quietly and incrementally, a series of hazards. His daughter, Nicole, who lived 20 minutes away, was driving to his house twice a day and lying awake worrying the rest of the time. Walter and Nicole worked with an occupational therapist who assessed the home, identified the specific modifications required, and designed a conversion of the detached garage on Nicole's property into a fully accessible private suite for Walter. It was his home, his space, his front door, but Nicole was 22 steps away. They enrolled Walter in a 3-day-per-week adult day program so that Nicole could work without her attention constantly divided, and they integrated a remote monitoring system for medication reminders and overnight fall detection. Walter's neurologist, at his 12-month follow-up, told him that his functional trajectory was meaningfully better than she would have predicted based on his diagnosis stage. He was attending his granddaughter's soccer games. He was present for the ordinary moments that constitute a life, and every night he went to sleep knowing that the person who loved him most in the world was close enough to hear him if he called out. And now we arrive at number one, the model I have saved for last because it is the least known, the most misunderstood, and in my clinical opinion, the most important development in senior care in the past 20 years. It is called the Village Network model, and I need to describe it carefully because it does not fit neatly into any existing category you may have in your mind for what senior care looks like. Here is the foundation. A senior remains entirely in their own home. They join a membership-based community organization, a village network operating in their geographic area. That network, run by a combination of professional coordinators and rigorously trained volunteers, provides a customized, comprehensive web of support that is built specifically around what that individual actually needs, not around what an institution has decided to offer. Need transportation to your cardiologist appointment? The Village Network has volunteer drivers, vetted and trained, who will take you and wait for you and bring you home. Need help deciphering a Medicare explanation of benefits that reads like a foreign language? The network has a volunteer who spent 35 years in healthcare administration and considers this exactly the kind of problem she retired to help with. Need a contractor to install grab bars in your bathroom and a ramp at your front door? The network maintains a directory of vetted, senior specialized contractors at negotiated rates. Need someone to sit with you on a Tuesday evening because your husband of 51 years died 3 weeks ago and the silence in the house has become something you cannot describe? The village network has that too, real human presence, chosen, not assigned. The research behind this model is striking. A 6-year study published by the University of California, San Francisco's Institute for Health and Aging evaluated outcomes among 1,600 village network members across 11 states. Compared to non-member seniors of similar age and health status, village members showed a 51% reduction in nursing home placement, a 44% reduction in emergency department visits, and reported significantly higher scores on validated measures of purpose, belonging, and life satisfaction, a 51% reduction in nursing home placement from a membership that costs, in most village networks, between $500 and $1,200 annually, less than the cost of 4 days in a skilled nursing facility. What makes this model so effective is that it addresses what I consider the 4 fundamental reasons that aging in place fails for most seniors, even seniors who want desperately to remain at home. The first is practical logistics: transportation, home maintenance, technology navigation, administrative tasks, the accumulation of small practical problems that individually seem manageable but collectively become overwhelming. The village network absorbs that load. The second is social isolation, which, as we discussed earlier, carries a mortality risk equivalent to heavy smoking and which accelerates virtually every age-related disease process we know of. Village membership provides structured, consistent, meaningful human contact, not as a scheduled activity, but as the ongoing fabric of daily life. The third is health system navigation, the bewildering complexity of Medicare, of specialist referrals, of medication management, of understanding what your rights are and what your options are when a physician recommends a level of care you are not sure you need. Village networks with healthcare coordination components guide members through that system with an expertise that most families simply do not have. And the fourth, and this is the one I think about most as a geriatrician, is purpose. The research on purpose and longevity in adults over 70 is some of the most compelling in all of gerontological science. A study published in JAMA Network Open followed more than 6,000 adults over a 4-year period and found that those with high scores on validated measures of life purpose had a 15% lower risk of death from all causes. Village networks do not just provide services, they create a context in which seniors are contributors, not just recipients. The retired nurse who helps her neighbors understand their medications, the former accountant who volunteers as a financial navigator, the woman who has made the same pie recipe for 50 years and brings it to the community potluck every month. These are not trivial acts. They are, in the language of the research, purpose-generating activities, and they are keeping people alive. The Village to Village Network maintains a national directory of active village networks at vtvnetwork.org. As of this year, there are more than 350 active villages across the United States, in urban areas, in suburban communities, and increasingly in rural regions where isolation and limited access to services make this model particularly critical if there is no village network in your area.